Hi everyone, today I've got another Seascape tutorial. The full real-time version is available over on my Patreon, along with many other real-time gouache tutorials. The full length is about 2 hours long and I'll have a link down below to that. But otherwise, let's get started with this tutorial. I've got all the materials listed down below. I'm using 300 GSM paper, a flat palette, 2 jars of water, a cloth to dry my brushes, and just a flat brush, a round brush and a liner brush. After I've done a very light sketch, I'm going to start mixing up the color of the sky, and I'm going to use my flat brush to block this in. So I'm mixing a little bit of ultramarine blue with a little bit of primary blue and mixing it with white to mix a pale blue. And I'm just going to transition from a pale blue in the top left corner across to a lighter blue and into a very pale purple on the right hand side. So to transition into the purple, I add in a little bit of the primary red, and I only add a little bit at a time because the red can easily overpower the blue. So I want to make it a very pale purple, so I slowly add in some red, and then I'm adding in lots of white as I'm moving down the sky because I want to transition into a much paler blue and purple. Then I want to paint in that warm orange glow from the sun, so I mix a little bit of warm yellow with some white and I just block in that area. And I also want to paint in that warm pinkish peach glow around the outside, so I add a little bit of primary red to the orange mixture and I just blend it out with the surrounding edges. And then my goal here is to get a really smooth blend in the sky, so I look for those transition colors so I can blend it all together smoothly. So I have to clean off my brush and mix up some of that pale purple, but this time I add a little bit more of the primary red into it so it leans a bit more towards a red purple, and then I can slowly transition into that warm orange. So whenever I have too much paint on my brush, I'll clean it off and mix up some fresh paint, or even just go in with a clean brush to just blend together the paint on the paper, so that way there's no harsh edges. You can see here I'm just moving my brush back and forth very lightly across the surface of the paper to smooth out those transitions. And for those really light patches, I mostly just pick up white and a little bit of that color and just softly place it in and blend it out with the surrounding edges. For the warm glow where the sun is coming from, I just painted it in that pastel pinkish orange color. After I've blocked in the color for the sky, I'm going to go in and paint those clouds on top. We've got some clouds on the left hand side and also some more wispy clouds coming from the right hand side. So I start with those first, and to create that wispy effect, I use a kind of dry brush technique or a dry brush texture. So I mix up a bit of that pale purple, the same that we used for the sky, but a little bit more intense, and I just brush it on in the direction that the cloud is moving in, or the wisps of cloud is moving in. And then I go in with a clean brush and just drag the paint out so that it becomes a bit more sparse and it's not very solid. I add in a bit more primary red into the mixture as I move down, and I just repeat the same technique using a kind of dry brush to sweep across the sky. And then I clean off my brush and use a clean dry brush just to pull out some of the wisps of cloud so it creates that sparse texture. Once I'm done with that, I just want to intensify that pink glow just above where the sun is setting. So I mix a little bit more primary red into the warm yellow mixture from before, and I just place it just slightly above where the sun is coming from, and I just smooth out the edges. Now for the clouds on the left, I'm going to mix up a pale purple. I'm still using the same mixture, just using ultramarine blue with some primary red and just lightening the mixture with some white. And I'm going to paint on those clouds on the left using a paint that's a little bit thicker in mixture than what I used for the block-in of the sky. So that way it can easily layer on top. And I try to paint in the texture that I can see, so it's a little bit sparse towards the edges of the clouds, and to help give the clouds more depth, I highlighted a little bit more white towards the edges of it. So as I move towards the right of the cloud, I add in a bit more white into the purple mixture, and later we'll also come in with some pink to highlight the right side of the clouds because it's receiving that warm glow from the sun that's setting below on the right hand side. So I'm going to paint in some other clouds as well, and I'm going to paint a bit of a shadow underneath them and towards the left, and highlight them towards the right and kind of above. Here I'm also trying to build out the depth of this cloud by adding a bit more shadow to it using a slightly darker purple and then highlighting other areas that are a little bit lighter. Now for that warm pinkish glow around the clouds, I mixed the primary red with a lot of white and a little bit of the existing warm yellow on my palette, and I just placed that towards the bottom and right side of the clouds. Once everything has dried, I realized that some of the clouds dried a little bit lighter, so I try to place back in some of the darker values in there. So I just go over some parts, and I also paint in just a few more clouds towards the sun. And after I finish that, I'm ready to move on to painting the water. For the water, I like to start with the block in, which means looking past all of the details and just looking for that base color or the colors that are beneath all the waves and everything else. So I switch back to my flat brush for the block in, and I start with a purple. Usually the colors in the sea are a reflection of the sky, so that gives you a big clue into what kind of colors lie underneath all the waves and everything. So I'm using the same colors as the sky really. I'm using the purple from above, the pastel purple, and the very pale pink, and also the very pale yellow as well. And I'm essentially just reflecting them and trying to achieve that smooth gradation between all of the colors. Once I've done that, I go back in with a really dark purple and go across the horizon line just to deepen it. When I paint seascapes, I notice that the horizon line is usually quite dark, so I want to paint in that dark line in purple. And then I use a really pale purple to lightly outline where some of the waves are, because when I blocked in the base, I covered up my sketch lines, so I'm just placing them back in so I know where to place some of the waves. Then I block in the shadow underneath these waves, because as the water rises, it blocks some of the light from coming through, so it creates a shadow just in front of the wave. So I'm just blocking it in, and then I want to blend it out with the base color we blocked in. And the way you place in your brush strokes here is very important, because you want to suggest the direction in which the water is moving. So you can see I'm pulling out the strokes from the wave in a downward motion. So I'm trying to suggest that the water is flowing down that way. And then I want to go in with a really dark shadow, so a very dark purple, and I mix in a little bit of black just to get that really dark value, and I place that right at the very top edge of the wave where it's darkest. I then blend out that gradation so I get a very smooth transition, and afterwards I want to place in some of the very small and distant waves. So I use my liner brush and I just place in these thin strokes in the distance. I try to vary them a little. Sometimes they're a bit more straight, sometimes they're a little bit like a open triangle, sometimes they're just a smooth rounded curve, and they also overlap here and there. So these are just to suggest the movement of water in the far distance. And using the same mixture, I go over the outlines I placed in before, now that I'm more sure of my placement of the waves. I place in some of the ripples in the water that are now a little bit closer, and so they're a little bit longer and a little bit larger. I'm still using that same pale purple mixture. For some of them, I add a little bit of shadow underneath them just to bring out a bit more depth in them. Next, I want to work on the foam that appears after the wave crashes over. So I'm mixing a lot of white with a little bit of blue, and I place it just above some of the larger waves, but also some of the smaller distant ones as well. And I paint it on in the direction that the wave is crashing over, so in a slightly rounded curve. I add a little bit more white to the mixture as I highlight towards the top of the foam. Now I'm going to work on the wave that is closest to the foreground, and I start by first placing in that shadow underneath and then blending it out to a smooth gradation. And after that, I'll go in and paint the foam on top of it again, and I'll start off with a pale blue and I'll add in more white to it to highlight the foam. I'm going to go back in with that very dark purple mixture and just deepen that shadow just underneath that foam, or just underneath where the wave crashes over. And I'm also going to outline again where the wave kind of goes up to, and then I'm going to go in with that pale blue mixture for the foam and just paint it on top of that wave at the very front. I'm almost finished with the painting now. I'm just picking out some of the textures that I can see, so little bits of the foam in the water, and just placing those in. And I also want to reflect a little bit more of that peachy pink color into the water, as I noticed it was a little bit lacking in the reflection. So I mixed up some more and I just threaded it in between the waves, and I went back into the waves again and painted over a bit of it. And the very last thing I want to do is just paint on a bit of the texture in the bottom left hand corner. So I'm using my liner brush and some pale purple, and I'm just painting in these diagonal strokes so as to suggest a bit of the movement of the water across the sand. And after I place in those strokes, I go in with my flat brush, which is clean and dry, and I just sweep over it lightly just to blend it out and smooth out those brush strokes. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and again, I'll have my Patreon link down below in case you're looking for more gouache tutorials to follow along with. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye bye!